Ammonia doesn't have a smell when it kills you. It just shuts down your lungs while you're checking your stock portfolio. It's a ghost in the pipes. Silent, cold, and brutally efficient. It doesn't give warnings. It just works. I respect that. My name is Dwight Pilsudski. People who know me call me Dewey. I'm 61 years old, and for 34 of those years, I was the chief refrigeration engineer for the Tyson Foods plant in Dakota City. The place is a city unto itself, a sprawling monument to protein production fed by a labyrinth of stainless steel pipes filled with 200,000 pounds of anhydrous ammonia. I knew every valve, every compressor, every inch of that labyrinth. I didn't just maintain it. In a very real sense, I had built it. 2 days before the humiliation, I was replacing a king valve on the number 4 high-stage reciprocating compressor. It's a dirty, cold job. The kind of job that gets into the lines on your hands and stays there. The air bites. The metal is unforgiving. I was halfway through, torquing the last bolt when Bryce Arlington appeared behind me. He didn't say my name. He just cleared his throat, a soft, pathetic sound that was swallowed by the thrum of the machinery. I finished the sequence. You don't interrupt a torque sequence on a high-pressure system. Not if you want to go home with all your fingers. I wiped my hands on a rag, the grease and grime of familiar second skin, and turned to face him. He was wearing a navy blue Armani suit that probably cost more than the transmission in my Yukon. On his feet were soft leather moccasins. Moccasins. In an industrial refrigeration zone. The floor is slick with condensation and glycol. He was a hazard to himself. "Dewey," he said, his voice smooth and practiced, like he'd rehearsed it in front of a mirror. "We need to talk. My office." He didn't wait for a reply. He just turned and walked away, his expensive shoes making little squeaking sounds on the concrete. He had hands that had never held anything heavier than a latte. He was 28 years old, with a fresh Columbia MBA framed on his wall right next to a signed photo of some motivational speaker. He was the new director of plant optimization, a title that meant nothing and everything. His office was on the carpeted side of the building, a world away from the cold, hard reality of the plant floor. It smelled like lemons and ambition. He was sitting behind a massive desk made of some dark, polished wood. He didn't look up when I came in. He was tapping at his laptop. He let the silence hang in the air, a cheap power move he'd probably read about in a book. I stood there, my work boots looking out of place on his pristine rug. I could feel the cold from the engine room still clinging to my clothes. Finally, he looked up. His eyes were flat, disinterested. "Dwight, as you know, we're moving toward a full digital transformation of our core systems. We're implementing a new, AI-driven HVAC and refrigeration management paradigm." Paradigm. I hated that word. It was a $20 word for a 10-cent idea. "The new system," he continued, gesturing vaguely at a sleek monitor, "optimizes efficiency by predicting maintenance needs and automating pressure balancing. It renders much of the, legacy oversight redundant." I knew where this was going. I'd seen the consultants in their sharp suits and sharper smiles, walking the floor with their tablets, taking notes on things they didn't understand. They saw old machines. I saw reliable workhorses that had run for decades without fail because they were understood by the men who ran them. "Your role, in its current form, is part of that legacy framework," he said, his eyes flicking to a script on his screen. He was reading from a script to fire a man who had given this company 34 years. "As part of this realignment, your position has been eliminated, effective immediately." He pushed a manila envelope across the desk. It was thick. The standard severance package. The COBRA forms. The meaningless letter from HR thanking me for my service. I didn't move. I just watched him. A dead calm settled over me. It wasn't shock. It wasn't even anger. Not yet. It was clarity. Cold and sharp, like the ammonia itself. I saw him not as a boss, but as a problem. A variable in a system. and I was, if nothing else, an expert at understanding systems. "I understand," I said. My voice was steady. It surprised even me. He seemed relieved. He probably expected yelling. A scene. He wanted this to be a clean, efficient extraction. "Good. I'm glad you see the big picture, Dewey. This is about moving forward. Progress. Progress." He said it like a prayer. He slid my keycard and ID badge toward him. "HR will need these. You'll have 20 minutes to collect your personal effects. Security will escort you." I took the silver pen from my shirt pocket. It was a cross, given to me by the plant's founder, Old Man Harris, 20 years ago. A gift for keeping the plant online during the ice storm of '99 when the whole county went dark. "To the man who keeps us cold," the inscription read. I set it on the desk. Then I placed my badge next to it. Then the keycard. A neat little row of my life's work. He looked at the items, then back at me. A flicker of something, annoyance maybe, crossed his face. This wasn't on his script. "The door's right there," he said, his voice a little tighter. I gave him a slow nod. I didn't take the envelope. I turned and walked out of his lemon-scented office, leaving my entire career on his polished desk. As the door clicked shut behind me, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. He thought he was cutting dead weight. He didn't realize he was cutting the brake lines. If you love stories about underdogs who refuse to stay down, and the sweet justice that comes when experience meets arrogance, hit that like button and subscribe right now. You won't want to miss how this plays out. I didn't go to my locker. There was nothing in there but a spare set of coveralls and a worn copy of a refrigeration manual from 1982. My personal effects were in my head. They were in the muscle memory of my hands. I walked straight to the main gate. The security guard, a kid named Marcus I'd known since he was born, looked pained. "Mr. Pilsudski," he said, his voice low. "I'm sorry. They told me." "It's all right, son," I said. "Just doing your job." He buzzed me out. The gate slid open, and I stepped out into the afternoon sun. 34 years, and it ended like this. Not with a handshake or a gold watch, but with a 28-year-old in moccasins, reading a script. I walked across the vast parking lot to my 2001 GMC Yukon. It had 280,000 miles on it, dents in the fender from a rogue forklift, and an engine that rumbled with the sound of pure, uncomplaining reliability. I trusted it more than any person in that building behind me. I got in, turned the key, and the big V8 coughed to life. I didn't look back. Here's what Bryce Arlington didn't know. He saw a collection of pipes and compressors. He saw a line item on a budget labeled Maintenance and Personnel. He didn't see the history. He didn't see the ghosts. Back in 2013, OSHA, in their infinite wisdom, rolled out a new set of national standards for industrial ammonia refrigeration. The standards, known as RETAACR, were complex and required a whole new level of certification for operators. But there was a provision, a tiny little footnote in the Federal Register, that our corporate lawyers in Chicago fought tooth and nail for. Article 4, Paragraph 2. The Grandfather Clause. It stated that any pre-1985 ammonia cascade system, a specific and increasingly rare design, could continue to operate under its original specifications, provided it was overseen by a certified legacy operator. This was a compromise to save companies like Tyson from spending hundreds of millions on retrofitting plants that were still perfectly functional. There was only one catch. To get that certification, you had to have been the lead engineer on that specific system for a minimum of 10 continuous years prior to 1990. In the entire Tyson Foods network, across dozens of plants, there were exactly 3 such systems. And as of 2013, there were 2 men who held that certification. One was in a plant in Arkansas. The other one was me. The guy in Arkansas had a heart attack in 2019 while fishing on the White River. He died with a trout on his line. Which left me. For the Dakota City plant, I was not just an engineer. I was a legal requirement. My signature, my digital key, my physical presence was woven into the very operating license of the facility. The daily logs, the weekly pressure tests, the monthly valve certifications, they all required my specific, non-transferable RETA credential to be logged into the system. Without that credential, the system's own internal logic, mandated by federal law, would begin a controlled 72-hour shutdown sequence. It wasn't a bug. It was a feature designed by lawyers and engineers to ensure the plant couldn't operate outside its legal framework. Bryce, with his Columbia MBA and his belief in digital transformation, had probably never read a Federal Register in his life. He saw my salary, a fat $162,000 a year, and my resistance to his new paradigm as a liability. He saw an old man who needed to be put out to pasture. He never once thought to ask why the old man was still there. He assumed authority came from his title on the door. He was about to learn that real authority comes from the fine print on page 347 of a government document. I drove home. My wife Martha was in the garden, tending to her roses. She saw my Yukon pull in 3 hours early and knew immediately. She'd been telling me to retire for 5 years. She hated the late-night calls, the holidays I missed because a compressor blew, the permanent worry that came with my job. She met me at the back door, her hands covered in dirt. She just looked at my face. "They did it then," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yep," I said, kicking the mud off my boots. A strange look crossed her face. Not pity. Not anger. Relief. "Good," she said, pulling off her gardening gloves. "Now you can finally fix the gutter on the garage." That night, I slept for 8 straight hours for the first time in a decade. No phantom beeps from a pager that was no longer there. No half-waking dreams about pressure drops or valve failures. Just quiet. Empty darkness. The next day, I didn't check my phone. I didn't look at the news. I got up, had coffee with Martha, and then I went out to the garage and started working on the gutter. It was simple. Honest work. Measure, cut, fasten, cause and effect. No paradigms, no synergy. Just a problem and a solution. Meanwhile, back at the plant, the clock was ticking. Bryce Arlington was probably having a celebratory lunch at some overpriced steakhouse downtown. He'd send out a self-congratulatory email to corporate headquarters in Chicago. Phase 1 of the optimization is complete. Legacy redundancies have been removed. Expect a 12% reduction in Q4 operational overhead. He would be a hero. For about 48 hours. The breaking point came, I figure, sometime on the second day. My termination was processed at 3:15 p.m. on a Tuesday. The first required log entry I missed would have been the 6 a.m. shift change on Wednesday. The system, finding no RETA credential, would have flagged it. A yellow warning on a screen full of green lights. The day shift operator, a good kid but green, would have noted it and probably sent an email to the engineering department. An email that would have landed in an inbox that no longer existed. By 6 p.m. Wednesday, after a second missed login, the system would have escalated to an orange alert. It would have automatically sent a notification to the plant manager and the director of plant optimization. Bryce probably saw the email on his phone, saw the technical jargon, RETA-A CR credential failure, and dismissed it as a glitch in the old system. He might have even told someone to just reboot it. You don't reboot 200,000 pounds of ammonia. By 6 a.m. on Thursday, 38 hours after my termination, the real fun would begin. The system would enter its pre-shutdown sequence. Non-essential cooling loops would begin to power down. Alarms would start chiming in the control room, soft at first, then more insistent. The new AI paradigm that Bryce was so proud of would be utterly useless. It was programmed to manage the physical hardware, not the legal code embedded in the software. It would be like having the world's most advanced autopilot in a car that has just had its registration revoked by the DMV. The car runs fine, but it's not legally allowed to be on the road, and the onboard computer knows it. Production would start to suffer. The kill floor, the processing lines, the flash freezing tunnels, they all rely on a precise and unbroken chain of refrigeration. As loops began to shut down, temperatures would slowly begin to rise. Product quality would fall. Federal inspectors, who have offices on site, would start taking notice. Their own sensors would tell them something was wrong. Bryce would be in meetings. He would be looking at spreadsheets, trying to find the problem in the data. He would be talking about synergizing solutions and leveraging assets. He would be calling the software company in Silicon Valley that sold him the new system. They would run remote diagnostics and tell him their software was working perfectly. Because it was. It was the legal framework around it that was collapsing. By Thursday afternoon, the plant would be in chaos. The plant manager, a decent man named Dave Hatcher, who was just a few years from his own retirement, would be sweating through his shirt. He would be digging through old binders, the ones covered in dust in my old office. And sooner or later, he would find it. The file labeled OSHA Compliance, RETA Grandfather Clause. He would read it, and a cold dread would settle over him. He would pick up the phone and call Bryce. That conversation would be short. Dave would explain the situation in simple, direct terms. Bryce's world would shrink from the size of a global corporation to the size of a single paragraph on a forgotten document. The hubris would evaporate, replaced by the icy grip of panic. He had not just fired an old engineer. He had single-handedly shut down a facility that processed 1.5% of the nation's beef supply. The financial losses weren't in the thousands. They were in the millions. Per day. The final shutdown was scheduled for 3:15 p.m. on Friday. 72 hours on the dot. It's a failsafe of last resort. The system performs a hot stop, venting high-pressure ammonia into emergency flare tanks and shutting every critical valve. It's a violent, expensive process to reverse. It can take weeks to safely bring the plant back online. It was designed to prevent a catastrophic failure, but in this case, it was the catastrophic failure. I knew all of this. I knew the timeline. I knew the sequence. I sat on my porch, drinking a cold beer, and listening to the cicadas buzz in the summer heat. The gutter was fixed. The lawn was mowed. For the first time in my adult life, my work was done. My phone rang at 4:30 p.m. on Thursday. An unknown number with a 312 area code. Chicago. I let it ring. It rang for a full minute, then stopped. A minute later, it rang again. Same number. I picked it up. "Is this Dwight Pilsudski?" The voice was strained, high-pitched. Not Bryce. Someone much higher up the food chain. "Who's asking?" I said calmly. "My name is Robert Henderson. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Tyson Foods North America." He sounded like he was running a marathon. "Mr. Pilsudski, we have a situation at the Dakota City facility." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said. "I retired on Tuesday. I'm no longer with the company." There was a pause. I could hear him breathing, trying to control himself. "Yes, I've been briefed on that. Look, I'm not going to waste your time. We have a problem, a serious one, and it seems only you can fix it. The plant is shutting down." "Is it?" I said, taking a sip of my beer. "That's a shame." "Mr. Pilsudski," he said, the politeness fraying at the edges. "This plant is losing over $3 million a day. We have contracts to fulfill. We have a legal obligation to operate. I need you to come back. Name your price." Name my price. The 4 most beautiful words in the English language. I thought about the 34 years, the missed Christmases, the nights spent sleeping on a cot in the control room, the condescending smirk on Bryce Arlington's face. I thought about the silver pen I'd left on his desk, I was at my grandson's Little League game when the final call came. It was the top of the 5th inning, and Tommy had just hit a double. I was sitting on the aluminum bleachers, the sun on my face, a hot dog in my hand. My phone buzzed. It was Henderson again. I had told him I would think about it. This was his 4th call in as many hours. Pilsudski, I answered, my voice flat. Dwight, Henderson said, dispensing with the formalities. We're 24 hours from a full hot stop. My board is screaming. The SEC is going to be asking questions. What is it going to take? I watched my grandson standing on second base, beaming. This was the first of his games I'd made it to all season. I used to be on call, always. Now, they were on my time. I'm retired, Mr. Henderson, I said, my voice carrying over the crack of a bat. I'm enjoying watching my grandson play baseball. I will fly a helicopter to that baseball field to pick you up, he almost shouted. I could picture him in his Chicago skyscraper office, tie loosened, sweating into his $1,000 shirt. The image brought a thin, cold smile to my face. That won't be necessary, I said. My terms are simple. It's not a negotiation. Anything. Just tell me. I took a bite of my hot dog. I let him wait. The silence was my weapon now. First, I said, chewing slowly, Bryce Arlington. I want him gone. Not transferred. Not reassigned. Fired. I want him escorted from the building by security before I set foot on the property. I want his termination confirmed to me personally. By you. There was another pause. This one was shorter. Done, Henderson said. Consider it done. What else? My services are no longer for hire on a salaried basis, I continued. I am now an independent consultant. My fee for overseeing the stabilization of the Dakota City plant and training a suitable replacement is $4 million, a one-time payment wired to an account I will provide before I enter my credentials into your system. The line went dead silent. I could hear the faint sound of office chatter in the background. Then nothing, as if he'd muted his phone to scream into a pillow. $4 million. It was an absurd number. It was the price of his company's arrogance. It was the cost of 34 years of my life. I had calculated it based on the plant's daily losses, plus a little extra for pain and suffering. $4 million? He stammered. Dwight, that's my price, I interrupted, my tone leaving no room for argument. The plant is losing $3 million a day, you said. A hot stop will cost you tens of millions more in restart costs and lost product, not to mention regulatory fines. My price is a bargain, but it's only good for the next 5 minutes. After that, it becomes $5 million. I'm a retired man, Robert. My time is valuable. I heard him take a deep, shuddering breath. He was doing the math. The math was brutal, and it was all on his side of the ledger. And one more thing, I added. My old silver pen, the one I left on Arlington's desk. I want it back. That seemed to break him. It was such a small, petty detail in the face of a multi-million-dollar disaster. He might have even laughed if he wasn't so terrified. You'll have your pen, he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. You'll have it all. The wire transfer is being initiated now. Just get here, Dwight. Please. I'll be there in the morning, I said. I'm not missing the end of my grandson's game. I hung up the phone. Tommy's team won, 7-5. I bought him ice cream on the way home. It was a good day. The next morning, I didn't put on my old work coveralls. I wore a clean pair of jeans, a polo shirt, and my comfortable work boots. I drove the Yukon to the plant, the same route I'd taken for over 3 decades. But this time was different. I wasn't an employee. I was a contractor, a specialist, a hired gun. The mood at the main gate was tense. The morning shift was lined up, unable to get in. Production was at a dead stop. Marcus, the security guard, saw my truck and practically ran to open the gate himself. He didn't ask for ID. Morning, Mr. Pilsudski, he said, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and reverence. They're waiting for you. I parked in the visitor's spot, right by the front door, a spot I'd never been allowed to use. As I walked toward the entrance, the glass doors slid open and two security guards emerged. Between them was Bryce Arlington. His Armani suit was rumpled. His face was pale and slick with sweat. He wasn't wearing his moccasins. He had on a pair of running shoes, as if he'd been planning a quick getaway. He carried a small cardboard box with his framed MBA and a few personal trinkets. Our eyes met for a second. There was no arrogance left in his, just pure, unadulterated humiliation. He knew he had been utterly and completely defeated by the one thing his expensive education never taught him: consequences. I didn't say a word. I just held his gaze until he looked away, staring at the pavement as they walked him to his car. His time here was over. Dave Hatcher, the plant manager, met me in the lobby. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. "Dewey," he said, his voice thick with relief. "Thank God." "Dave," I nodded. "Is the wire confirmed?" He fumbled with a tablet. "Yes, confirmed a half hour ago. The COO is on a conference line in the main control room." "And my pen?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out the Silver Cross pen. He handed it to me like it was a holy relic. I clipped it back into my shirt pocket. "All right," I said. "Let's go to work." The control room was a circus. Corporate guys in suits I didn't recognize were huddled in a corner, speaking in hushed, panicked tones. The main board was a Christmas tree of red and yellow lights. The primary alarm was blaring, a shrill, incessant pulse that grated on the nerves. The remaining operators looked up as I entered, their faces a mask of exhaustion and hope. Henderson's voice boomed from a speakerphone on the console. "Pilsudski, are you there?" "I'm here, Robert," I said, walking over to the main terminal. I ignored the suits. I ignored the chaos. I looked at the board. The cascade failure was exactly where I expected it to be. Less than 12 hours from a full hot stop. They were closer to the edge than I thought. "It's a mess, Dwight," Dave Hatcher said beside me. "We tried to bypass the Rita lockout, but it's hardwired." "You don't bypass it," I said, shaking my head. "You satisfy it." I sat down in the chair I had occupied for countless hours. It felt familiar. I flexed my fingers, then began to type. The system prompted for a username. I typed d.pilsudski. Then it asked for a password. I entered it. Finally, a third screen appeared. Rita, ACR, Legacy Credential required. I reached into my wallet and pulled out a small, laminated card. It was my official certification. On the back was a 32-character alphanumeric key. I had memorized it years ago, but protocol was protocol. I typed in the long string of characters and hit enter. For a moment, nothing happened. The alarm continued to blare. The red lights continued to flash. One of the suits muttered, "It's not working." Then, a single green light blinked on the board. Credential accepted. A new screen appeared. System shutdown override engaged. I turned to the terrified operator next to me. "Get me manual control of the high-stage compressors, starting with number 4. Then, open the bypass valves for the secondary glycol loop. Slowly. I want to bring the pressure back up by no more than 5 psig per minute." The blaring alarm cut off. The silence was deafening. The only sound was the clicking of my keyboard and the calm, steady sound of my voice calling out commands. I was not just an engineer anymore. I was a conductor, bringing a symphony of machinery back from the brink of silence. It took 2 hours to stabilize the core systems. Another 4 to bring the entire plant back to a green board. The suits watched, useless. Henderson stayed on the line, silent. By late afternoon, the low hum of a fully operational plant had returned. The first shift of workers was being called back in. I leaned back in the chair and took a long, slow breath. "The plant is stable, Robert," I said into the speakerphone. I don't know how to thank you, Dwight." Henderson's voice was filled with a weary awe. "You already have," I said. My consulting contract includes 30 days of on-site transition. I'll use it to train my replacement. You will hire who I tell you to hire. No MBAs. I want a kid from the floor, someone with grease under his fingernails who understands the machines. Are we clear? Crystal clear, Dwight, he said. The plant is yours. I spent the next month doing exactly that. I picked a young man named Carlos, a sharp kid who had been working on the maintenance crew for 5 years. He was smart, he was hungry, and he respected the machinery. I taught him everything, not just the manuals. I taught him the sounds, the vibrations, the things that aren't in any book, the knowledge that only comes from decades of listening. On my last day, I handed Carlos the keys to the control room. I gave him a copy of my old, worn-out 1982 refrigeration manual. The answer's always in there, I told him. You just have to know how to look. I walked out of that plant for the last time, not as a discarded piece of legacy hardware, but as the man who had brought a titan of industry to its knees and then saved it. My Yukon was waiting for me. I got in, turned the key, and drove away without a glance in the rearview mirror. The $4 million was in my account. It wasn't just money. It was restitution. It was a recognition of value that had been ignored for far too long. I paid off my mortgage. I set up college funds for Tommy and his sister that would see them through any school they wanted. I bought Martha the new greenhouse she'd been dreaming of. I bought myself a fully restored 1969 Ford Mustang, a car I'd wanted since I was a teenager. I don't miss the plant. I don't miss the smell of ammonia or the 3 a.m. calls. Sometimes, when I'm at one of Tommy's games, I think about Bryce Arlington. I wonder what happened to him. He probably got a new job at another company, putting optimization on his resume and telling stories about the backward, legacy-bound culture he tried to change. But he'll never forget the lesson he learned in Dakota City. Authority is a title on a business card. Control is knowing which wire to cut. Or, in my case, which one to reconnect. He had the MBA on the wall, but he didn't have the keys to the castle. I did. And in the end, that's all that mattered. Some assets don't show up on a spreadsheet. Experience is one of them. Respect is another. They learned that lesson the hard way. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hit that like button if you enjoyed the story. Leave a comment about a time you saw experience put arrogance in its place, and be sure to subscribe to the channel for more.